to occupy the White House. We are here to occupy the United States Senate. We are here to occupy the House of Representatives. And no band of miscreants and malcontents is going to stop us. I don't have a teleprompter. I don't have a chalkboard. But I do have a speech. And I want to thank Slade, our man from Florida, for that introduction. I want to thank Americans for Prosperity for helping to save this country. And that's you. And I want to thank the Tea Party activists with whom you work as well. I don't know where we'd be without you. But we'd be in even a worse place. I'm very proud to be a partner with AFB because Barack Obama hates you. Which is why I love you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the hour is late, the time is now, and the nation needs you like never before. What is happening to this wonderful country is a crying shame. So distant is America today from its founding principles that it's difficult to precisely describe what kind of country it is. And when I speak of country in this regard, I'm talking about the government. We can't really describe it as a constitutional republic anymore because the Constitution has been and continues to be easily altered by a judicial oligarchy that mostly enforces, if not expands, the statist agenda. It cannot really be called a representative republic because so many edicts are produced by a maze of administrative departments that are unknown to the public and detached from its sentiment. It cannot really be called a federal republic because the states that gave the central government life now live at its behest. So what is it? It is a post-constitutional government transitioning into an increasingly powerful utopian tyranny. We start from the premise that the Declaration of Independence asserts a truism, that we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In other words, individual sovereignty is our heritage as human beings and Americans. This is the legacy bestowed on successive generations by the Founding Fathers. This is the nature of man. This is who we are. The purpose of the Constitution was and is to establish a federal government to secure a society that protects the individual's unalienable rights, not devours them. Thus, the Constitution's division of power among three branches of the federal government. Its enumeration of specific powers to each branch. The adoption of the Bill of Rights. And as if to put an exclamation mark behind the federal government's limits, the ratification of the 9th and 10th Amendments. And if the debates during the Constitutional Convention, and if the text of the Constitution itself do not make this clear, do not make clear what the framers intended in this regard, which they most assuredly do, the Federalist Papers and the notes of the ratification debates in the several states and the arguments of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists make it unequivocal and without question. The problem is not the clarity of our history and our legacy. The problem is the ideology and lawlessness of our opponents. They are not bashful and nuanced anymore, are they? We know who they are, and we know what they want. Now, the first Fabian socialist president of this country was not Barack Obama, although he is one. It was Woodrow Wilson. Wilson had nothing but contempt for the Declaration and the Constitution. In 1905, 5 years before ascending to the presidency, Wilson wrote the following, quote, "No doubt a great deal of nonsense has been talked about the inalienable rights of the individual, and a great deal that was mere vague sentiment and pleasing speculation has been put forth as a fundamental principle." He said, "Government is a part of life, and with life it must change. Only this principle must remain unaltered, that there must be the freest right and opportunity for adjustment." He means government adjustment. "Political liberty consists," he said, "in the best practical adjustment between the power of the government and the privilege of the individual, and the freedom to alter the adjustment is as important as the adjustment itself for the ease and progress of affairs and contentment of the citizen," unquote. Now, he was the president of Princeton, so he says a lot of gobbledygook, so let me cut to the bottom line. So for Wilson, individual liberty was a privilege, not an unalienable right. The Declaration and the Constitution of no real consequence. Individual rights are malleable and adjusted as necessary by an all-powerful government. Therefore, the federal government must not be constrained by the Constitution's limits. It must be free to pursue utopian fantasies of the mastermind's desire. Franklin Roosevelt was of the same mindset. In 1926, he declared, "If we realize that the days in which we live present great problems wholly new, we may adopt one of two attitudes. Some among us would stop the clock, call a halt in all this change, and then in some well-thought-out way bring back an orderly, defined method of life. Old standards and customs," he said, "would revive to meet the new conditions. Classic dicta would again govern. The good old days restored." He's being sarcastic. He said the other method, of course, is active progress. Now, this is the ignorance of the conceit of the statist. He possesses a utopian notion of government that flies in the face of human experience and understanding. Progress is not measured by the increased centralization and consolidation of everyday decisions in the hands of a relative few who use the power of government, a massive bureaucracy, and the law to rule over the people and plunder the fruits of their labor. Progress is not measured by the freedom of the individual. I should say it is measured by the freedom of the individual, tens of millions of us, to make voluntary and independent decisions about our own pursuits, interests, and desires. Progress is made through respect for and protection of private property rights. Progress is made by encouraging individual self-sufficiency and independence. America is not great because its government is big, bloated, and omnipotent. It is great because for most of our history, it honored the sovereignty of the individual and rejected the tyranny of statism. Wilson and Roosevelt understood that if America is to be altered, it must be unhinged from its founding. And their modern-day adherents know it too. The managing editor of Time magazine, Richard Stengel, recently wrote that if the Constitution was intended to limit the federal government, it sure doesn't say so. He said the framers weren't afraid of a little messiness, which is another reason we shouldn't be so delicate about changing the Constitution or reinterpreting it, unquote. Washington Compost columnist Richard Cohen wrote that this fatuous infatuation with the Constitution, particularly the 10th Amendment, is clearly the work of witches, Wiccans, and wackos, unquote. In fact, folks, so numerous now are the members of Congress who openly and proudly defy the Constitution, which they've taken an oath to uphold, I can't even track them all. Indeed, Barack Obama, as you well know, 5 days before his election to the presidency, famously asserted that he seeks no less than the fundamental transformation of our society. Let us be as clear as we possibly can. Fundamentally transforming America means the rejection of Americanism. It means bypassing Congress with executive fiats. It means the appointment of dozens of unaccountable czars. It means doing whatever you think you can get away with to institute your ideology. For the statist and his utopian agenda, it means the fundamental deconstruction of our republic and the relationship of the individual with government. It means altering the nature of man from a free, independent human being to a dependent, drone-like part of a mass, like the clowns on the street outside as I speak. Now, we live in perilous times, and you and I are well aware that nothing less than our way of life and the future of our children are at stake. And this transformation from liberty toward tyranny started out gradually, but is now in full sprint. For those who remain skeptical or blissfully ignorant, which is not you, of the events engulfing them and their fellow citizens, let me briefly describe the situation, and you in the liberal media, get your pens out and start recording what I say. Let's look at some compelling yet frightening statistics. The extent to which the gross domestic product, that is, the measure of all wealth created in our country, is consumed by the federal government, gives us a good picture of how big the federal government has become. In 1930, I think we were an advanced society still in 1930. People knew how to flush toilets and use light bulbs and get medical care and feed themselves, didn't they? In 1930, the federal government spent 3.4% of GDP. During 43 and 44, at the height of World War II, expenditures reached 43.5%. But in 1948, after the war, the percentage quickly dropped to 11.5%. Throughout the 50s and 60s, federal expenditures as a percentage of GDP hovered between 15 and 17%. During the late 70s and 80s, it ranged between 17 and 19%. Starting in 2009, the percentage reached 21%. And in just 1 year, in 2010, it jumped to 24% of GDP, and today it's approximately 25%. The federal government consumes or controls through direct taxation and spending 25 cents of every dollar created by the private sector. And I'm not even talking about the states and localities. All the vast majority of this massive increase is due to domestic programs and spending. But even this is not enough to satisfy the federal Leviathan. Let's look at the debt. At the end of 2008, the federal debt as a percentage of GDP was 40%. 2 years later, in 2010, it jumped to 60%. This past fiscal year, which ended a month ago, it reached 70%. This year, the debt will be 100% of the gross domestic product. It will equal every penny created in the private sector. $15 trillion in debt, $15 trillion the economy creates. By 2035, it will reach more than 190% of GDP. This is a path to certain economic and societal collapse, without question. Let's look at another thing. The U.S. budget deficit for fiscal 2011, last year, $1.3 trillion, the second largest shortfall in history. The highest 1 year was in 2009, $1.4 trillion. In 2010, it ran $1.3 trillion deficit. In the last 3 years alone, the federal debt has climbed over $4 trillion. But they can't find any place to cut. The most recent estimate of total unfunded obligations for entitlement... Is this boring you? No. I mean, I got cookies up here. I see some cookies in the audience, too, as a matter of fact. It's a whole other story. All right. The most recent estimate of total unfunded obligations for entitlement programs, including Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and others, in dollar terms, for which there are no resources currently available and will never be resources available, is $62 trillion, or more than $525,000 for every household in the country. This is a prescription one day for violence. For violence in the streets, in my humble opinion. You think Greece is bad? Greece is a pimple on an elephant's you-know-what compared to the United States. With all due respect. Now, in order to run a central government this big, you need a massive administrative state with significant police powers. And that's precisely what we have. The federal government employs more than 2 million bureaucrats who populate an untold number of departments, agencies, bureaus, divisions, boards, whatever. And this army is paid very handsomely, earning on average more than double what employees earn in the private sector, and whose employment and benefits are immune from economic recessions and depressions experienced by citizens in the private sector. This administrative state, the fourth branch of government, in many respects independent of the elected branches of government and without regard for the will of the people, it writes and issues its own regulations, which have the force of law. In fact, in 2010, it issued over 80,000 pages of new laws. Compliance with all these regulations is estimated to cost the private sector over $1.7 trillion a year, absorbing another 12% of the GDP. Thousands of these regulations include criminal fines and penalties. The Congressional Research Service, an arm of Congress, was asked a simple question: how many of these regulations carry criminal offenses? They answered, "We're not sure." But they said tens of thousands. So there's your answer, tens of thousands. And what do these federal regulations cover? The better question is, what don't they cover? For example, inside the home, the federal government regulates washing machines, dryers, dishwashers, dishwasher detergents, microwave ovens, toilets, shower heads, heating and cooling systems, refrigerators, freezers, furnace fans and boilers, ceiling fans, whatever. My mouth broke. Dehumidifiers. Thank you. I hate those damn things. Light bulbs. What else does it regulate? Certain renovations, fitness equipment, clothing, baby cribs, pacifiers, rattles and toys, marbles, latex balloons, matchbooks, bunk beds, mattresses, mattress pads, televisions, radios, cell phones, iPads, other digital media devices. Hold on, get my second breath. Power supplies, stereo equipment, garage door openers, lawn mowers, lawn darts, pool slides. And there I decided to stop. The federal government also regulates toothpaste, deodorant, dentures, and most things in and around the medicine cabinet. What about the home itself? What do you have to go through in this country to build a home today? Federal rules set standards for insulation, gypsum board, treated lumber, windows, pipes, ventilation ducts, flooring, paint. Home builders must comply with the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, and the National Historic Preservation Act, and that's before you deal with your state and local government. Let's look at the production and consumption of food, the latter of which I enjoy quite a bit myself. Did you know that the total federal budget for regulating nearly all aspects of food production to consumption exceeds the entire nation's net farm income? Consider food packaging. New mandates require food labels, quote, to disclose net contents, identity of commodity, the name and place of the business of the product's manufacturer, packer, or distributor. Certain terms like low sodium, reduced fat, high fiber must meet strict government definitions. The federal government has defined other terms used for nutritional content, including low, reduced, high, free, lean, extra lean, good resource, less, and light. If food is described as organic, it must meet the federal government's definition. I've barely touched the surface. Now, I could delve into regulations involving the automobile, its assembly, parts, environmental controls, mileage standards, safety standards, window labels, but I won't. I could delve into regulations involving the workplace, including wages, taxes, health benefits, pension benefits, union elections, equal employment requirements, financial practices, record keeping, and even the labeling of the contents of what you have in the vending machine down the hallway, but I won't. The list of products, services, and human conduct regulated by the federal government is virtually endless. But now the federal government has become even bolder. Why go through the back door when you can come through the front door? The federal government is flat out nationalizing businesses like General Motors and Chrysler, buying up stock in businesses, including scores of banks. And by the way, I love my bank. Abolishing whole industries. Well, one person got it. Abolishing whole industries. I used to like it when they gave out, lollipops and toasters, but I think they're federally prohibited from doing that now. So they're wiping out whole industries, student loan businesses. They're preventing businesses from opening new plants in right-to-work states like IBM in South Carolina. It's forcing more and more employees into union shops, whether they like it or not. And it's interfering with executive compensation. Well, let me put it to you this way. Today, the federal government is the largest creditor, debtor, lender, employer, consumer, contractor, grantor, property owner, tenant, insurer, healthcare provider, and pension guarantor in existence. But a trip through post-constitutional America would be incomplete without mentioning Obamacare and cap and trade. Obamacare not only destroys the private healthcare system, which is the envy of the world because of all of its innovations and access to life-saving and quality of life treatments that our society offers. It is the most brazen assault on individual liberty and expansion of federal power in our lifetimes. The notion that federal politicians and bureaucrats can claim authority over the individual and dictate what individual citizens must purchase, whether they want to purchase something or not, and whether it's in their best interest or not, is characteristic of totalitarian regimes. It is the power government uses to relentlessly and ceaselessly coerce, repress, and control the individual. And the idea that the EPA can claim the power to regulate carbon dioxide, which is not and never has been a pollutant. Which is what you exhale when you breathe, which is what plants need to create oxygen, which is necessary to sustain life on Earth, last time I checked. It's not about global warming. It is the means by which the federal government seeks to control private property rights in the name of health and the environment. And if you say you're doing something in the name of health and the environment, apparently in this country you can do any damn thing you want. And that's the point. If you can regulate carbon dioxide, then what is left of limited government? The federal government will use this power to develop and institute long-term industrial and agricultural policies, which you may have thought died with the implosion of the old Soviet Union. If we have to rely on federal policy to clothe and feed us, we will freeze and starve to death. How did we survive and thrive as a people before the onslaught of big government? How did we cope without all these laws and regulations, taxes, spending, and borrowing? How did we eat, clothe ourselves, shelter ourselves, educate ourselves, raise our children, start a business, find a job, secure medical care, prepare for retirement, drink clean water, breathe clean air, choose the right light bulbs, flush the damn toilet? How did we do it without the federal government's help? Are we better off as a result of this? No. Are you happier as a result of this? No. Are you more secure? No. Are you more optimistic? No. Thank you. The nation is less vigorous and less prosperous than before. The fact is that more and more of our fellow citizens are fed up with what's going on with this government. Our ranks are growing, our message is getting out, and we have a plan. You know what that plan is? It's called the Constitution of the United States. We have a jobs and housing program. You know what that is? It's called capitalism. We have a foreign policy, too. You know what we call it? Don't tread on me. No amount of class warfare, Marxist propaganda, phony jobs bills, unconstitutional executive orders, and liberal media smear jobs of our candidates will dispirit us or divert us. The day is long past when we leave our generals on the battlefield without the infantry. Now, we're here to draw a line in the sand. And we're here to take a stand. And our message is clear. Take your hands off our wallets, get out of our homes and automobiles, leave our farms and businesses alone. We will choose our doctors, we'll eat whatever the hell we want, and stop teaching our children trash. We are Americans. We are not subjects. We are not the masses. We are still a strong, self-sufficient, independent people. We neither want nor need temporary politicians telling us how to live, where to live, and even whether we'll live under Obamacare. These politicians are to represent us, not dictate to us, or we're going to kick their asses out of office. We own this government, every damn part of it. They don't own it. They need to be controlled, not us. Our designs are nothing short of taking this nation back, reestablishing constitutional government, liberating our economy, and defending individual sovereignty. And if you stand in our way, we have every intention of defeating you. One of my favorite quotes from my favorite president, Ronald Reagan, it's at the end of my book. He said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like to live in the United States, where men were free." We conservatives, we constitutionalists, we Americans need to get busy. God bless you, and thank you.